Good day everyone, this is Trisame Importante and Michaela Angela Abinido, and we'll be discussing the good governance in Japan. We'll start by sharing with you the history. The emergence of Japan. The first humans to inhabit Japan walked over from the mainland around 35,000 BCE, at a time when the northwestern tip of Hokkaido was connected to the eastern extremities of Russia. Evidence of cord-marked pottery and the foundations of a basic society gave rise to Japan's first documented period, the Jomon period. The idea of a central government in Kyoto, with the emperor as it said, does not quite paint a true picture of the political landscape during these times. In fact, powerful warlords with their own armies dominated the regions outside Kyoto. And with the end of conscription in 792 CE, the emperor was forced to rely on these clans to quash rebellions and keep control. Samurai rule and civil war. By the end of the 15th century, the country had descended into a period of civil war known as the Sengoku Jidai. For the next 100 years, the powerful clans spread throughout the land, would each vie to further their position into the political landscape. These clans had their own house codes, which often took precedence over the laws of the government and in some cases even issued their own currency. This is not to say that the emperor and shoguns ceased to exist, merely that their control over the domains of the daimyo was limited at best. The daimyo did, however, continue to pay lip service to their former masters, albeit more out of political maneuvering and the fear of being outflanked in the constant power struggle than any real sense. The Sengoku Jidai also left its mark on the physical landscape. Agriculture progressed as the daimyo tried to make the most out of the land in their domain, and castles began to model the landscape as they sought to shore up their defenses or make conspicuous displays of power. Indeed, many of Japan's most famous castles were constructed during the centuries of civil strife. The Edo period and Tokugawa rule. Tokugawa Ieyasu, installing himself as shogun, did not wash away the grievances felt by those daimyo with ambitions for power, or who thought Toyotomi Hideyoshi's son, Hideyori, the legitimate successor. Ieyasu exacerbated such tensions by rewarding those daimyo who had sided with him at the Battle of Sekigahara with land taken from those who had not. Despite the relative stability of the removal of Ieyasu's main rival brought about, something still needed to be done to address the fragility of rule in a newly unified Japan. To this end, the Tokugawa shogunate began to consolidate power in Edo. The Meiji Restoration and Imperial Japan. The relative ease with which power shifted back to the emperor stood in contrast to the huge task of nationalization which lay ahead. While Tokugawa rule had unified the country, governance was still semi-feudal in nature, and the social structure remained based on the Shinokoshu hierarchy. The emperor moved from the Kyoto to Edo in 1868, and the city became the official capital and subsequently renamed Tokyo, Eastern City. The task of day-to-day governance, however, was carried out by a select group of advisors, men of standing from the southern clans of Satsuma who had played a significant role in the Meiji Restoration. The post-war era and modern Japan. General Douglas MacArthur, who had been commander of the United States Army Forces in the Far East, landed at Atsugi in Kanagawa Prefecture on the 30th of August 1945. As Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, he was responsible for steering a war-ravaged Japan on course to recovery. But efforts are being made to make Japan, and Tokyo in particular, a more international place. The Tokyo 2020 Summer Olympics being a major catalyst. Significant initiatives include the 2011 change to the education system, whereby English classes were made mandatory from 5th grade onwards. The policy changes to make it easier for skilled workers to obtain work visas. This country is by no means without challenges in the 21st century, but no matter how great this may appear, no nation has shown itself more resilient in the face of change than Japan. Next, demographics, economics, statistics, and facts about Japan. Aging population. Japan's population currently is not only shrinking, but it is also one of the fastest aging populations in the world. At the same time, it has one of the highest life expectancies. The cohort of people aged 65 years and older consisted of more than 36 million people in the 2020 and was estimated to make up close to 38% of the population by 2060. As a consequence of the country's demographic changes, the Japanese economy today faces severe labor shortages, as is exemplified by a very low unemployment rate. Until recently, the workforce in Japan was shrinking rapidly, putting pressure on the social security system. But continued employment of the elderly and especially the growing integration of women into the labor market have kept the labor force relatively stable and even led to a slight increase in the recent years. Migration. The population in Japan appears largely homogeneous compared to many other countries around the world. Yamato people, a term used since the 19th century for the ethnic group native to the Japanese archipelago to distinguish them from minority groups such as Ainu, Ryukyuans, or Koreans and Taiwanese, who had settled at peripheral areas of Japan, make up the overwhelming majority of the population. However, the number of foreign residents living in Japan had been increasing. Since this group consists of the largest part of younger people, it has also a positive effect on the size of the workforce. Population density. The population density in Japan amounted to about 347 people per square kilometer as of 2018, remaining one of the highest in Asia. The population is highly concentrated in metropolitan areas, most notably Tokyo, which is one of the world's most populated cities, as well as Osaka and Nagoya, while many rural areas face depopulation tendencies. Land prices in the three large metropolitan areas have been increasing again since the mid-2010s. Economics. Japan's strong economic growth in the second half of the 20th century ended abruptly at the start of the 1990s. The Plaza Accord doubled the exchange rate value of the US dollar versus the yen between 1985 and 1987, which fueled a speculative asset price bubble of a massive scale. The bubble was caused by the excessive loan growth quotas dictated on the banks by Japan's central bank, the Bank of Japan, through a policy mechanism known as the window guidance. As economist Paul Krugman explained, Japan's banks lent more, with less regard for quality of the borrower than anyone else's. In doing so, they help inflate a bubble economy to grotesque proportions. Trying to deflate speculation and keep inflation in check, the Bank of Japan sharply raised interbank lending rates in late 1989. This sharp policy caused the bursting of the bubble, and the Japanese stock market crashed. Equity and asset prices fell, leaving overly leveraged Japan banks and insurance companies with books full of bad debt. The financial institutions were bailed out through capital infusions from the government, loans and cheap credit from the central bank, and the ability to postpone the recognition of losses, ultimately turning them into the zombie banks. The wider economy of Japan is still recovering from the impact of the 1991 crash and subsequent lost decades. It took 12 years for Japan's GDP to recover to the same levels as 1995. And as a greater sign of economic malaise, Japan also fell behind in output per capita. In 1991, real output per capita in Japan was 14% higher than that of Australia. But in 2011, real output had dropped to 14% below Australia's levels. In the span of 20 years, Japan's economy was overtaken not only in gross output, but labor efficiency, whereas previously it was a global leader in both. In 2018, labor productivity of Japan was the lowest in the G7 developed economies and among the lowest of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The Japanese economy is forecast by the quarterly Tankan Survey of Business. Japan formerly had the second largest assets and wealth behind only the United States in both categories, but was eclipsed by China in both assets and wealth in 2015. Japan also had the world's second largest economy by nominal GDP behind the United States, but was eclipsed by China in 2010. Japan's manufacturing sector was formerly the second largest behind that of the United States and nearly eclipsed the US in 1995. But China's manufacturing sector eclipsed that of Japan in 2007 and the US manufacturing sector in 2010. Thus, Japan is currently the world's third largest manufacturer behind China and the United States.
Innovations of Japan. For Japan and elsewhere in the world, it will be innovation that unquestionably will resolve the issues we face in the future. Japan is committed to being the very first country to prove that it is possible to grow through innovations even when its population declines. One of which is the digital farming. Various concerns over agricultural sustainability, including water shortages, and in order to address the issue, a digital farming technology has been developed in Japan. With this technology, farmers were able to use water and fertilizers more efficiently, and it helps improve agricultural productivity even in areas with limited access to water. Another one is the industrial robot technology. Japan has led the world in industrial robot technology, and now is about to spur an even greater evolution by combining this technology with an open-source deep learning framework developed in Japan. Deep learning enables industrial robots to make judgments in complex operational situations. Moreover, the learning can be shared between robots to increase efficiency, and also manufacturing sites worldwide use industrial robots to streamline and automate operations. Next is the automobile industry. The sectors of Japanese economy which enjoyed the highest percentage of growth are automobile industry, innovative technological sector, electrical products, and domestic items. Japan's main export goods are cars, electronic devices, and computers. The most important import goods are raw materials such as oil, foodstuffs, and wood. Japan is best known for its most powerful and biggest consumer electronics industry. Japan's industrial sector is heavily dependent on imported raw materials and fuels. What are some policies implemented in Japan? First, keep trains quiet and relaxing. As soon as you step into a train in Japan, you'll immediately realize how quiet it is. Being quiet inside the train is a sign of politeness in Japan, as people tend not to want to be stressed out or bothered by others around them. This does not mean that you are not allowed to talk, but using a voice suitable for the space is highly encouraged. Second, women-only cars. These cars are limited to female passengers during certain specified times, typically the morning and evening rush hour as well as late evenings. These cars serve the purpose of making women feel comfortable even when the train is very crowded and to make them feel safe during late nights. If a male passenger happens to enter a women-only car even by mistake, he is likely to get called out either by female passengers, the station staff, or the train conductor. Third is the priority seats. This is designed for PWDs, pregnant, passengers with infants, and the elderly. Normally, these seats are located at the front and back of each car. In line with this, passengers standing near the priority seats were obliged and encouraged to turn off their phones. Fourth is navigating the ticket gate. When passing a ticket gate to either get in or out of the station, simply insert your train ticket into the automatic ticket gate and begin walking through. The ticket will come out on the other side, so take it and proceed. When it is time for you to exit through the ticket gate, once again, insert the ticket and simply pass through, as your ticket will be kept by the machine. By doing so, people should properly fall in line, because if not, it's a no-go for the train. Fifth, tipping is not necessary. There is no tipping custom in Japan. It can even be somewhat rude to leave a tip at establishments, as the implication is that the staff are not paid enough. To express gratitude for good service, or simply if you just want to be kind, simply saying arigatou gozaimasu or thank you is highly welcomed. Sixth, no smoking and no littering on the streets. This is implemented due to the increasing rate of smokers and litterings on the streets in Japan. Smoking and littering on streets, especially on historical areas, are strictly prohibited. Seventh, smoking at restaurants. Restaurants and cafes in Japan have separate seating areas for smokers and non-smokers or completely prohibit smoking. If you wish to smoke, please request to be seated in the smoking area called a kitsuinjo, and you will be guided to an appropriate table. What are the methods of Japan from formulation stage to implementation? First is the supporting self-help efforts of developing countries. The concept of actively supporting the self-help efforts of developing countries was first advocated by Japan, prior to other Western countries, based on Japan's own experience of development and its experience of providing aid to East Asia. Japan attaches central importance to support for the self-help efforts of developing countries towards economic takeoff. It is also the most important philosophy of Japan's official development assistance, or the ODA. So the international community is also increasing awareness of the importance of self-help efforts and ownership, and these concepts are mentioned in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development Assistance Committees, or the OECD DAC Development Partnership Strategy, Shaping the 21st Century, the Contribution of Development Partnership during 1996. Institution building, including legal system and building social and economic infrastructure, are fundamental to the development of those developing countries. Second is the perspective of human security. Human security strengthens the capacity of local communities through human resource development. Human security is the concept of protecting people from pervasive and critical threats to their lives, livelihoods, and dignity. Human security was first introduced as a perspective of Japan's diplomacy on the occasion of the ASEAN visit of then Minister for Foreign Affairs Keizo Ubuchi in 1998. In order to strengthen cooperation in the human security field, Japan established a trust fund for human security in the UN in March 1999. Human security includes protecting people in violent conflict, protecting people from the proliferation of arms, supporting the security of people on the move, establishing human security transition funds for post-conflict situations, encouraging fair trade in markets to benefit the extreme poor, and working to provide minimum living standards everywhere. Third is the assurance of fairness. It is necessary to take care that the benefits are fairly distributed among the people of the recipient country, including the local residents of the local area. It is particularly necessary to consider the situation of the socially vulnerable in the recipient country, such as children, the handicapped, the elderly, etc. The perspective of gender equality in development is important because it is necessary to ensure that men and women are equally participating in development and obtaining benefits from it. Japan must always place importance on every stage of the process, from the policy formulation stage to implementation, concerning consideration for the situation of the socially vulnerable and the gap between the rich and the poor, as well as the gap among various regions in developing countries. Fourth is the utilization of Japan's experience and expertise. Utilization of Japan's experience and expertise positioned as one of the basic policies. Japan has accumulated knowledge and experience that is rare in the world. Japan has experience of reconciling economic conservation with economic growth, creating an egalitarian society with a small gap between the rich and the poor, and of constructing national land resistant to natural disasters. Developing countries place high expectations in the technology, expertise, human resources, and system nurtured through these experiences. The Japanese people working in the field putting their heads together with the local people in the recipient country and sharing their workload to carry out joint projects amount to more than mere economic cooperation. Lastly, partnership and collaboration with the international community. Harmonize aid procedure among donors and partners in order to implement assistance more effectively and efficiently with limited aid resources. Japan should not simply follow in the trend in the international community, but it should actively participate in the process of establishing international goals and aid modalities conveying its own assistance strategies and ideas. Cooperation between Japan and US in the health and water supply fields was carried out, but recently they have been closely collaborating on measures toward peace building. Japan is not just contributing funds to international organizations, it is also enhancing collaboration with them. Japan is actively participating in their decision-making processes and also collaborates with them when implementing bilateral ODA. And Japan intends to enhance collaboration with international organizations that possess expertise in political neutrality.
Analysis. A growing literature stresses that governance, broadly defined as the traditions and institutions that determine how authority is exercised in a country, matters to economic development. Building on ideas of neo-institutional scholars such as Douglas North and Moncur Olson, several cross-national empirical studies have found a positive relationship between the quality of institutions and governance structures and economic growth. In this context, it is not surprising that a broad consensus among growth economists, development experts, and international policymakers has begun to view good governance as a prerequisite to sustain increases in living standards. Although this has made important advances in uncovering the political, institutional, and social determinants of economic growth, the governance matters approach to development is not without problems. Cross-national studies showing that good governance is a key determinant of economic performance can be challenged on the grounds of causality problems.
Lesson learned. Upon doing this presentation, the things that we learned about Japan is how eager their government is to make the life of their people easier. And though they face such issues or problems, they can still overcome those things because they move and decide as one and they respect each other's opinion and they are willing to embrace such changes, especially if it is good not just for their government but also for their people. It is important in one country that their leaders are thinking about their people's welfare and on how to sustain the needs of their people. This makes us admire Japan not just in having advanced technology, but also how passionate their leaders are and how disciplined their citizens are. This makes us believe that Japan is one of the countries that has good governance. Conclusion. Japan supports the self-help efforts of developing countries based on good governance. This is because good governance in developing countries is indispensable for effectively and efficiently advancing the development of those countries, and because good governance is necessary in order to redistribute fairly within the country, including to the poor, the fruits of growth obtained as a result of development. Therefore, I conclude that Japan is under the concept of good governance because they have the elements that includes democratic political systems, the rule of law, an accountable and efficient government, appropriate information disclosure by government, control of corruption, and the securing of human rights.